really hope that we can see more and more students of all ages involved in our programs, but particularly where it relates to the art college program, the art program at the Bermuda College, where you guys are perhaps making those decisions on where do you go with your artwork, and how much do you want to push yourselves to be active artists in the real world. Dany Pen, thank you so much.
First off, I want to thank everyone here for taking the time during your lunch break to come out to this lecture. It is a huge surprise that I'm getting this turnout, and I'm really thankful that you're taking the time to come and listen to me speak about my portfolio. So much appreciated, and I hope that we don't go on such a roller coaster journey where I'm putting you on a surprise trip. I'm going to ease you into it, and we're going to walk through a lot of issues that I'm very much concerned with and have incorporated into my work. Now, a lot of my work, if you're not familiar with it or if you are, has a lot to do with my identity, particularly my background being a descendant of the Khmer culture. For those of you that are not familiar with the Khmer culture, we are the native aborigines of Southeast Asia, which include Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So although we know Southeast Asia is divided by these different countries, the natives themselves don't see that divide. We constantly interact with each other through the different tribes. So for example, a lot of people in Cambodia are known as the jungle tribe, while in Laos, they're known as the mountain shaman tribes. And lower Vietnam would be seen as the water tribe. So it's all very tribal based, and the natives are constantly interacting with each other. You know, even though there's, we say, oh well, you have borders and boundaries. Well, for the natives, it doesn't really apply. So I just put some images up just to give you an idea of the identity, the background of the native aborigines of Southeast Asia. And most of you are probably more familiar, not with the people themselves, but the architecture, Angkor Wat. It's listed as one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's one of the largest temples in the world, hidden in the jungles, that was discovered. Or you might be more familiar with the reliefs, the bas-reliefs on the walls and temples and architecture of the Khmer people. So for the Khmer people, there's an intense love for arts. It's in their clothing, dance, architecture, and music. So for thousands of years, the culture is heavily rooted in the arts. Yeah, you caught that one. Well, 1975 came, and everything changed. And I want to give you a brief history, just so that when we dive into my portfolio, you get a really good foundation of what I'm working with. So in the 1950s, prior to 1975, a political party called the Khmer Rouge came into power within the government system. And they actually started off as a pro-Khmer activist group in Cambodia, advocating for the Khmer rights in maintaining their native culture and preserving it from European colonialism and Western influences. The commanding leaders were Pol Pot, Nuon Chea, Lang Sari, and Khao Sapan. Now, these were a group of former teachers, actually, who started off advocating for education and literacy in the country. But then 1975 came, and they won their seats in the government house, and their utopian ideologies turned into a dystopia. When they came into power, they gave you 2 options. You were either with the Khmer Rouge, or you were an enemy of the state. So they started to recruit young children into their party who they, at the time, felt were least unaffected by Western influences. Other children who did not join the Khmer Rouge, also known as KR, the abbreviation of the party, and whose families were considered enemies of the state, were forced to work on the internment camps. Then the Khmer Rouge, the KR, finally decided it was too much of a risk to allow enemies of the states to live, because they can still be communicating with Westerners, foreigners, so the killings began. They began taking photos of every person they were about to execute. In these photographs, each individual would have been killed anywhere from a minute to 5 minutes after having their photographs taken. All schools in the country were turned into prisons and executing sites. No one was exempted from this. Mothers, children, and babies were all included on the enemy of the state list. The photographs were purposely taken to show off how much foreigners, or quote-unquote enemies, the Khmer Rouge had eradicated. So much so that Kim Jong-II from North Korea actually sent a congratulations letter to the Khmer Rouge leaders saying, "Congratulations, you're almost at 100% of eliminating Western ideologies in your nation. You are close to achieving your freedom." To the Khmer Rouge, being under colonialism meant being a slave to the Western and European ideologies. So, what is an enemy of the state? The Khmer Rouge had specific guidelines to how one would be considered an enemy of the state. And yes, they did have a hit list, and this comprised of individuals who were deemed priorities in being arrested and to be executed. So who's on this list? If you were a former government official or anyone related with foreign governments, you had to be executed. If you were an artist, which meant visual artists, sculptors, dancers, singers, musicians, writers, filmmakers, you had to be executed. Professionals and intellectuals, if you got an education, you went to school, got your degree, you had to be executed. Teachers, educators, and professors. Christian or Catholic or affiliated with the church. Doctors and those affiliated with Western medicine. Muslims and those affiliated with the Champas and mosque. Buddhist monks. And those affiliated with foreign trade. These were their priorities, individuals who were chased down and had to be immediately executed in the country. Now their list continued. After they had extinguished the former government, everyone is gone, majority of the artists are gone now, they've executed majority of these people now, they continued with their list. And the list went on to this absurd detail of people who now understood and spoke a foreign language. So if you knew French, English, Chinese, or Mandarin, or Cantonese, you're gone. People who wore glasses because you're wearing a device that the Western brought to the country. People who were from the city because city people were known to always be involved in business and foreign trade. People who were of mixed heritage now, so now this is where racism comes in, where for the Khmer Rouge Party, if you were mixed with Vietnamese, French, English, or Chinese, they felt it was a thinning of the bloodline, and that it was out of their hands in preserving the authentic bloodline of the Khmer native people. So now they're saying, okay, if you're mixed, we're not going to risk that, you have to be executed too. People who spoke the city dialect, the Ebonics of the city. So even though everyone's speaking the same language, there's kind of a different dialect. You know, when you go into, for instance, one parish here or another, you can tell who's from Somerset and who's from St. David's. So if you had a city dialect, you're gone. People who could read and write now. People who spoke the old Khmer language. People who prayed. People who questioned the KR. And people who were not able-bodied. And then the list went on, and then they said, screw it. You know, over 2,000 years, the culture is so heavily influenced by Western ideologies. Now let's just start all over completely. Let's go back, erase everything, and just start from year 0. So that meant no more guidelines here. It's just everybody, period. And the commanding leaders are going to redo this newfound kingdom that they called Angkar. But they didn't just stop at killing people. They also had to eradicate the arts, because for them the arts was very much a part of the culture. So here you see bullet holes being fired onto the image here on the relief. And they felt that the culture needed to be redone because it was so heavily influenced already by foreign ideologies over the duration of thousands of years of trade that they've had with other countries. So they started decapitating heads of the gods or sculptures or statues. And the old Khmer language was replaced by a new one that was created by the party. Now I have to remind you again, the party was comprised of all former teachers. And these former teachers were at the top of their game when it came to getting their testings done. Duke, he was considered the most genius. He scored the highest in mathematics in the entire country and in France. And you had another one who was a language arts teacher. So he was able to redo the whole language and jig it up and take out certain vocabularies and terms and introduce new ones to fit their ideologies. So 1979 came, the Vietnamese troop invaded and discovered the horrific scenes of the killing fields, and they had no idea that this was happening. So to give you a brief history overall, in the span of those few years, over 2 million people were murdered, a third of the population was eradicated, and 90% of all artists were killed. So almost all arts and cultures related, books, films, photographs, sculptures, temples, and music pre-1970s were burned, defaced, erased, and now lost forever. So that was just to give you a foundation of the cultural history that I've been working with. Now, growing up, I've heard a lot of stories about my families who were heroes, who were murdered and tortured. My family made sure I knew this history and about what happened during the war. And my family actually managed to save some photographs and books actually. And I've always been fascinated in times of war how people hold on to, certain things. And I always found that people always hold on to photographs because people could tuck it in their pocket, fold it up, and hide it in places. And it's amazing that just a piece of paper, people hold on to it so dearly. And because all means and objects related to the arts during the war were being wiped out by the Khmer Rouge, there was more of a reason to protect these photographs. So growing up, I always had access to these photographs. And for years, I was obsessed in looking at them, examining them. And I found myself trying to connect with the experiences and the people in the photographs. But I found it a very difficult process, actually. I felt like a stranger looking at photographs. I was told who these individuals are, how they're related to me, but I still felt distant. I sort of felt like a voyeur almost, and I couldn't really connect. Even though my family kept, telling me like, these are your family members. They did all these great heroic things to save the family, to escape the war. And I couldn't really give, in my own personal way, a personal tribute to these individuals because I didn't know who they were. I didn't know their personalities. I've never met them. So for me, there was a void, a large void in my identity in trying to gather who were these people that were once connected to me. And through that frustration, this individual came in and answered a lot of beautiful things for me that I really needed at the time. For those of you that don't know, Roland Barthes is a theorist who studied French literature and classics at the University of Paris. And he became a professor and taught in Romania and Egypt and actually joined the National Center of Scientific Research and devoted his entire life research in sociology. And he wrote numerous books, numerous books, but the one book that stood out for me was called Camera Lucida. And it was amazing how I actually came across this book because I was at the bookstore and it was just lying there in this pile of, when they have the discount, the sale section on the shelf. And it was just thin book and it just stood out for me. I was like, oh, Camera Lucida, what's all that about? And I picked it up and I purchased it. And all and behold, it went home and changed my life forever. And why did it change my life forever? Because he wrote about a photographic theory, outlining a way of looking at photographs. He wrote about what he termed the stadium and the punctum. So the stadium is when we first look at a photograph, it's Latin for study. When we first look at a photograph, we get the average effect from a photograph. The application to a thing, taste for someone, a kind of general enthusiastic commitment. The viewer can take on a general interest in the photograph, one that's even stirred sometimes, but in regards to an ethical and political culture, so yeah, it moves us sometimes in those radical ways. But the stadium is always clear to us. It's always, yeah, a good photograph. But it's always ultimately coded for us to understand it. It sometimes assumes respectability, social advancement, conformism, family life, Sunday best, how people look in their outfits, yeah. So we understand it right away. And we can say for ourselves, okay, yeah, I like this photograph, or no, I don't like it, but we understand it. We understand the photograph. The punctum is the next level of looking at a photograph, which means to pierce. Punctum is actually a sacred word for a photography theorist. For Roland Barthes, it's a reflection on the metaphysical qualities of a photograph. It's not easy to define, but in short, the punctum is that detail of an image that catches the viewer's eyes and make the picture resonate with, his or her, based on his or her personal experiences and emotions. And it's always different from viewer to viewer because we all have different life experiences. So we all bring something different to the table when we're looking at maybe the same photograph. It's a power of expanding the thought. We're stimulating the mind, the ideas, and really taking the story from that one photograph and now turning it into multiple stories for ourselves. It's not coded at all, and Roland Barthes says it's a good symptom of disturbance from the stadium. It cries out in silence. It's an odd contradiction. So for myself, I was like, wow, this allows me to really look at my family photos from a perspective now where I have guidelines to really see if I can connect with these photographs, looking for a punctum in these photographs. To give you some examples of what Roland Barthes considered successful punctums in photographs, I pulled this one out to show you what he considered successful. Here we have an image of two slaves posing with their master. And for Roland Barthes, for him personally, the punctum is the slave to the right-hand side of the individual sitting, which is to our left, with his arms crossed. Because when we cut him out of the picture and we look at the other two individuals, with the other slave with her hand on his lap, she's submitting to her master. And that's the normal image we would expect from that time period. And like how Roland Barthes said, conforming to certain ideas. But that one individual standing there with his arms crossed is breaking that conforming idea. And therefore is the punctum. Because now we're thinking, well, why is his arms crossed? Is he allowed to have his arms crossed? What does it mean? Is he defying what's going on there? So it's starting to make us question. And he's the one that's giving us the punctum. So another example of a successful punctum here is an image of Queen Victoria sitting on a horse. And the punctum here actually is the man holding on to the horse's strap or leash right there. Because when we think of the queen, we think of her holding the authority and power. But instead, in this image, she's not the one with the power. It's the horseman, because he's controlling the horse. Mm-hmm. And if anything happens to the horse, he would have control over it, not the queen. So here it's a push and pull on power play here. And then here's an image of Roland Barthes with his mother, and it was from his own investigation with his own family photos, and from him actually looking for punctums in his own family photographs that really gave me the guideline to how to connect with my own family photos. So here's an excerpt from his book about this photograph of him and his mother that I'm going to read out. And his mother just recently passed, so he's in the house, he's rummaging through all her old items that he has to figure out what's he going to get rid of, what's he going to hold on to. and he came across a whole bunch of her photographs, and this came out of that moment there. Did I recognize her? Sometimes I recognized a region of her face, a certain relation of her nose and forehead, the movement of her arms, her hands. I never recognized her except in fragments, which is to say that I miss her being, and that therefore I missed her altogether. It was not she, and yet it was no one else. I would have recognized her among thousands of other women, yet I did not find her. I recognized her differently, not essentially. Photography, therefore, compelled me to perform a painful labor, straining towards the essence of her identity. I was struggling among images partially true and therefore totally false. And after reading that, I was like, oh, wow, that's so me. Like, I've been struggling in that, painful labor of going through photos for years, and I had a wow moment there. And so to connect myself with my own family photographs on my level, I took it into my own hands actually to create the punctum myself. I physically manipulated photographs to convey the feelings I wanted out of the photographs, to sentimentalize the struggle that the people in the photograph went through, and also the journey of the object itself. So this is one of my family photographs, and here I've altered the image by burning it and staining it to the degree that it makes most sense to me in feeling the experience. I needed the materials to struggle, in essence, to relay to me the struggles of the individuals in the photographs. So in this photo, you have my mother to the far right, and then my grandmother next to her, and the rest are my uncles. So these are photos pre-war. So my mom's best friend, who was also executed. Here, I've purposely made the family home broken. The photograph is torn right down the middle of the house to show the wreckage and instability of the structure that had occurred. Again, family members who were also executed during the war. Here's another photo. My mom is standing right there with the striped horizontal shirts, and those are all her best friends around her, but they were all also murdered during the war.
Dany, can I ask you a question?
Yes?
How are you doing that without damaging the actual image or your existence? How are you making that happen?
I'm making a replication of the original photographs and manipulating the photographs that I've taken. It's a process that I do where I often take a photo of a photo, and I'm going to tap into that in a second because you'll see that I do that with all my photographs. So photography and resurrection. So my family also has photos of photos, meaning they took a photo of a photo, so I guess to preserve that other photo. So I don't know how many of us have done that or seen our family members do that. Before we had computers or Photoshop or any of those things, and we didn't want to go back to the film store and pay more money to get a whole bunch replicated. We used to just take a photo of a photo. So during this time when I discovered these photos, I thought I had the most brilliant idea ever. Photoshop had just come out into the technological world. So this is around, still in the early turn of the 2000s. And I was so excited. I thought to myself, with Photoshop, I can now zoom in like 100 times closer into these photographs. And actually, for the first time, get a clear image of family members in the photographs who I couldn't make out before. So an example would, like this family member in the photograph here. I was like, I can't see her photo from this distance, but if I photoshopped it in, I can see her face. And how amazing is that? For the first time, I can see faces of family members that for years I've only heard stories of. And so I started rummaging through photos that had also photos in the background. So think of, when you were a little kid in the living room when you had your birthday party and your parents took your picture, but you also had family photos on the wall in the back. So those family photos on the wall in the back, I also extracted forward. And this was the result. Yeah, it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to show you every single one. But every time I zoomed in, the photos became more blurry. The truth was escaping me even more, and I found myself even more distant from the individuals in the photographs. And this piece in particular was chosen to be part of the Contact Photography Festival in Toronto, where it's now in the collection of the Royal Bank of Canada. And the black and white series before it was shown at the board of directors, also in Toronto. And it came to this understanding where after doing this process and looking at Walter Benjamin's theories and Kostava's theories, I was like, oh wow, they've hit it right on right there where I can never access the core truth. Because here I was digging, trying to get to the core truth, and I was just entering a different subjective blanket or layer every time I was taking another blanket off. And so this quote came out of that experience. I live in the illusion that it suffices to clean the surface of the image in order to accede to what is behind. Mm. So even though I found, it was an illusion, I still kept doing it. I was like, okay, well, let me live in my la-la land for a bit. I'm not ready to step out of it yet. I still really feel I can get to the truth and uncover it. So I went through more of digging into photos. And I found myself here. I started asking myself, well, why am I doing that? Why can't you step away from it? Trying to find out this void of identity. And I'm going to read this quote out. As spectator, I was interested in photography only for sentimental reasons. I wanted to explore it not as a question, a theme, but as a wound. I see, I feel, hence I notice, I observe, and I think. And so the series was created. And I'm going to read this quote out. A new punctum, which is no longer of form but of intensity, is time. By giving me the absolute past, the photograph tells me death in the future is the stake. What pricks me is the discovery of this equivalence. I look at the photograph of a mother as a child. I tell myself she is going to die. Whether or not the subject is already dead, every photograph is this catastrophe. So no matter what, in the end, we're going to die. So one day, every photograph of ourselves is going to enter this realm of being a relic of who we are. And so I started going through the photographs of the victims themselves, and thousands of these photographs were taken by the Khmer Rouge Party. And I started trying to look for family members who were murdered during the war, and I found myself comparing aspects of my faces to these portraits, trying to figure out and see similarities to see, oh, maybe I might be related to this person, or oh, we have almost the same eye, we could be related, that could be my aunt that I've never met before. So I'm still looking for faces of family members that were lost. And the possibility that maybe that's my uncle, maybe that's my cousin. So these pieces were created. I'm not moving too fast with photos, am I? Okay. So the next thing I want to tap on is the artist as prisoner. And as I said showed in the beginning, artists were number 2 on the priority hit list. So when we're looking at a crowd right now, it's like maybe half of us, or maybe all of us, were on that list. So I want to go on and look at this photo for a second. This is actually a family photo of Pol Pot, who was one of the commanding leaders of the Khmer Rouge Party with his family here. And who would have guessed, this is the tyrant that a lot of people label the tyrant, who would create an uprising to eradicate millions of people. Now, this photo to Roland Barthes is what I would consider maybe a stadium. The typical family photo, it's static, it's correct, the visual codings are all there, it's easy for us to connect and relate to this kind of photograph. It's, in general, an easy photograph to look at. But unfortunately for my family, it's not an easy one to look at. And so this piece came out of it in the last biennial, the 2012 biennial call, and this piece was called Erasures. And this piece came out of me trying to update my family of the Khmer Rouge trials in the UN, because in the mid-90s they were all finally arrested by the UN, and the trial of the genocide began. And every time in the newspaper or an article of the trial would be updated, you'd have the story alongside the images of the leaders. And I guess what newsprint doesn't realize is that it makes it difficult for victims to read up on trials when the image of the murderer is right there. So I found myself, in trying to update my family of the trials, I had to at first start cutting out the images and then passing the article to them or reading them the article. And I spent years doing this, and then it just got really frustrating where I started erasing their images. And I said, you know, why does my family already lived through the war? Why do they constantly have to be perpetuated by the images of these murderers in their faces when they're trying to get justice? And so I then found myself erasing their images and trying to also cope with the ease of reading the trial. And so I had 4 DVDs here, screens when you actually open them. And each screen, sorry, I'm trying to get some, had an image, a portrait of one of the leaders. Here's a portrait of Pol Pot, and I'm erasing it. And I actually kept the erasure bits in a capsule for my own trophy. So that's just giving you a timeline of how it looks like. And then I started questioning myself what it meant for me as an individual taking on the career path as an artist. And, you know, growing up in Canada, you know, when you declare yourself, oh, I'm going to become an artist, you often get that saying, oh, you want to become a starving artist. Or you want to only hang out with the elite and the bourgeois in the museum. And it's like, really? But then on the other side, my family, they're saying, oh, what, you're now entering politics? You're putting your life on the line? You're putting your entire family's life on the line? You know, we all might get executed overnight tomorrow? Like, so it was very 2 different mind frames of how one part of the world saw how being an artist was like, and the other side seeing an artist as being a political move, taking on a political move. And so this piece was created called Artist to Artist. And it's actually, to the left here, 500 photos of all the artists, not all the artists, 500 photos of artists that were executed during the war for just being an artist. And majority of them are still students in there. So they rounded all the art faculty students and lined them up and said, all right, you're all getting executed because you want to become an artist. So, and then on the other side, we have successful artists from the West, or those that were supported in being an artist, all thriving and had become successful artists. And these are all individuals from the same generation. So it's just showing the difference, what lies in location and politics when you want to become an artist. This was actually a performative piece, speaking about myself growing up in the diaspora community. I struggled a lot with my identity, as you can see, and still am. And from being influenced by also the Western culture while trying to preserve my Khmer heritage. The difficulty there lies in me being a minority. living in a majority, and that's what the title of the piece is called, actually, minority living in a majority. And I felt sometimes one identity overpowered the other, and I had no control over it, especially when we speak in terms of environmental influences. In this piece, I'm actually dancing to a traditional folk song, and in between, the sounds of gunshots are being fired. And every time the gunshots would go off, I would fall to the ground, and my mask would fall off. The mask is actually of a Khmer deity called Hanuman, which I made, and it would fall off, and I would collapse to the ground, and I would scurry to try to find my mask and put it back on immediately. And this repeats itself over and over and over. After many years of trying to understand my family history and journey, I then went back to my own neighborhood where I grew up in Canada, in Toronto, because as much as I was searching for my own cultural identity, I also needed to explore how my upbringing and my own environment influenced me and made me who I am. I grew up in a place called Ressurection Park, where it was known for being a community where all refugees and immigrants were being housed by the government. And it had not a really pretty reputation outside of the community, but within the community, I felt there were a lot of hidden beauties that only those such as myself who have lived there could see it. And, you know, growing up, you learn so much from the people who live around you. So I was growing up with, you know, Sudanese refugees, Ethiopians, Somalians, the Rwandians. Before I even heard about the Rwandan genocide on the news, we already had a group of Rwandan refugees in our community. And so I was able to learn a lot of the international social issues right at my doorstep from my own neighbors and community members. So I went back and started to photograph where I grew up, to the old housing complex that my mother and I were placed in. And there's something about the scars on the walls very much telling you a story about me, how I lived, and the experiences of sitting and looking out the window might put you in my shoes for a second, and how all the other diaspora individuals or refugees in another country would feel. Oh, that's nice music effect. So this is a series. I'm not going to show you every single photograph, but it is cataloged into the Brooklyn's Art Library in New York. So if you're in New York, you could definitely take this series out of the library and actually go through the photographs. So I started taking photographs of people in my own community, which I felt was a very diverse melting pot of a community. You see how beautiful it is? Okay, now I'm in Bermuda, and a lot of my process in creating my work involves me taking photographs of people. That's my way of exploration and research. So I'm taking pictures of people. And from this process, I felt that Bermuda is very much also a very diverse place too, with people from all around the world coming together in one island, bringing forth and connecting cultures together. And this piece came out of that idea of diversity, where I was very much interested in Bermuda as a melting pot of cultures. And I found it amazing that one of the iconic images of Bermuda is the Gumby mask. I was really interested how the Gumby mask was a mixture of different cultures, Native, African, Caribbean, all representing Bermuda in one imagery, one visual. So I placed the Gumby mask on top of Warwick Academy students. The original photo itself, I got through the archives of rummaging through all these old boxes at the library day after day, and I found this one photograph that really struck for me, and it was very static, and there was this a conforming photo, I would say, just like how Roland Barthes would call it. And so I titled it Formalities. And this was the piece that won the Sharman Prize for Best Source of Inspiration. This was another piece I did a few years back. Some of you might have seen my YouTube explanation of this piece, or if not, I'll tap into it a bit. But this was exhibited at BSOA, and with this piece I worked with over 60 children ages 2 to 4 years old, exploring the race relation in Bermuda, which at the time in 2010 was a very heated topic in the community because the elections were happening. And it still is today, is a very heated topic. And I wanted to experiment with children, see if they saw race as adults do. So I had a group of children with the consent of parents, lovely parents, who said, yeah, sure, you know, we'd love to have our children be a part of this. And I just found the families I worked with were so supportive of this project. And I would give each child a puzzle piece. And without giving them any colors to look at beforehand, I made sure I hit the paint and all that so they weren't looking at one piece like, oh, I want that paint right away. What I did was I hit the paint and I asked them when they came into the room, I sat them at a table, groups at a different groups coming in after one another, and I'd place them at the table and I'd give them a puzzle piece, a blank puzzle piece, and all I'd ask them is, can you look at your arm, your hands? Can you tell me what is the color of your skin? Some kids gave me, the general answers of, what kids would say, yellow, peach, they're still learning their colors, vocabularies, pink. And some kids were very, lovely about it, whereas some were like, oh, well, green. I like green because I'm always painting with green every day, so every time I look at my hands are always dirty with green paint. So, yeah. 2 to 4. 2 to 4 years old in Bermuda. And then I had one beautiful answer from a young girl, 3 years old. She said, gray. My skin is gray because my mother taught me I'm mixed with all these different colors and cultures, so I think gray best fits me. I was like, wow. And, but then I had answers from children that said black and white. And what was surprising, though, is that these kids didn't even look at their arms. Some of them didn't even look at their arms, and they just looked me right in the face. I'm black. I'm white. And I'm like, well, no, look at your arms first before you give me an answer. But they were adamant, and it's like they knew what they wanted to say already. And it was very interesting, and it surprised me a lot because when I was giving them the puzzle pieces, I hadn't put them together as a mural yet. So I didn't know how it would result as a whole image would look like. So I had a student assistant who helped me put all the puzzle pieces together, and this was the result of it, of all the colors that was answered or said by the children to me. And you can see how many said black, white, and the rest said brown, pink, peach. Pardon? Yeah. And then with this piece here, if you haven't seen it yet, it's the 2014 Bermuda Biennial piece, Grooming Goods. And I had to work with the theme View from the Edge. And the first thing I had to ask myself is, well, what is the edge? And for me, the edge was a gateway of things coming in and out. And so I started thinking about this, what's coming in and out of this gateway, the edge. And, of course, consumerism came into mind. And so this piece came about where I'm combing the material cotton. I purposely chose cotton because of its historical narrative in trade. And in the contemporary context that I'm using it in is the economic slave labor and trade that we still currently have, and how cotton is still a part of that market. And so often nowadays when we speak to people about cotton, for some reason people like to use cotton in a historical narrative, and that we're still wearing cotton. It's still being made, it's still being picked. But who are the people that are, who's doing this today? There's still slave labor going on. And the imports and exports that is occurring worldwide, and Bermuda that is very much a part of this, with things coming on and off island. Now, I'm not just talking specifically, cotton here. I'm talking about goods coming in and off the island, and Bermuda a part of this international business. So I'm asking, how do we really value materials versus necessities and consideration of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into creating these goods? Do we really put much thought into it when we go out and purchase, a new shirt for $40, and we know that it was probably made by someone that was paid a dime? And it's pointing an awareness to the issue of consumerism, capitalism, and materialism. So, going back to what I originally was always exploring, my own identity, what am I currently working on? The Khmer artists in the diaspora are coming together to resurrect the arts in Cambodia, and currently there's a documentary in the making, which I'm one of the proud supporters of and also involved with this post-production. So everything from literature, dance, weaving, sculpting is being resurrected, and it's this contemporary moving occurring in the community. So I'm actually going to show that film right now that I'm talking about. And it's called Year 33, and it's done by Yana Watkins, and she's based in California.
Ai mến vì biết đồ.
I don't know why the image is not coming up. Sorry.
Ai mến vì biết đồ sao nghe dùng lo sập lo sọm tường.
So, that's my conclusion to the piece. Does anybody have any questions?
Your mother survived.
Yes, my mother was placed in one of the camps.
So how did she get out?
The story of the escape happened where a group of the older men had got together in a secret meeting in the night and said that they would escape they made sure it wasn't a full moon, because on a full moon they can chase you down. So they figured that you have to go through the barbed wires, and if you got caught, that's it. So you
Were
have to.
they in a camp in prison at that time?
Yes. So they were in prison, and they were forced to work on the fields. My mother was forced to work on the rice paddy fields. So, and the rice paddy fields was bordered with barbed wires. So they had to figure out a way how to get through the barbed wires. So it was a lot of strategy in trying to get through the wires itself. So they said one night, they all made the plan to escape through the barbed wires and just make sure you don't get caught through it, and then just run through the jungles. And so the group of them, some of them got caught, but the group that made it kept running, and it took them 3 months barefoot through the jungles to finally get to a refugee camp in Thailand. But the running wasn't always running because there was a lot of hiding. So it was like running, hiding, and then finally getting to the destination of being in the refugee camp.
And then waiting for a boat to take them from there.
Yeah.
Went to Canada.
Not necessarily straight to Canada. What the Red Cross did was that they went over and said they went and got a whole bunch of refugees and brought them back over to America. And they're not supposed to do that, where they're just bring the refugees over. So they taught everybody. They felt the need to save as much people as they can. So my mother was put onto the plane with a group of people, and she didn't know what was going on. And the whole time, with the language barrier, they kept teaching them, just remember the word sanctuary. Just say sanctuary. The moment you get off this plane, just say sanctuary. Because we know the law is, once you land and say sanctuary, you have to be protected by refugee laws. So if they weren't being taught the word sanctuary, then they would have been deported. So my mother remembered on that whole, she didn't even know she was on a plane that crossing, the ocean into New York until she got off. And the first thing she remembers saying, sanctuary, sanctuary, sanctuary. So, and from New York, a lot of the refugees were pushed out into other states, and of course Canada was part of that mission too. Yeah.
How old was your mother?
My mother at the time, she was pregnant with me, 25.
You're a survivor.
Yeah. So going through the whole refugee, immigration, that was my experience with my mother.
So the first thing you said on being delivered, sanctuaries.
Probably. So yeah. So everybody was housed in the church for the first few years because sanctuary often takes place in the church. A lot of churches came on board, the Protestant, the Catholic churches. They all had their own also sanctuary rooms for a lot of the refugees.
And she had all those pictures on her. She had preserved all
and
of
books.
those as she was.
Yeah. So.
Hidden little rice paddy, barbed wire. All those photographs still.
Yeah. The world photographs were always tucked in their clothing. So I don't know how some of the books. I don't even know how they managed to keep some of the books. So.
Just one question.
Yes.
Again, how extensive is the government effort now in Cambodia?
How
extensive is the government effort now to recreate sort of the traditions and the artistic strength that Cambodia once had? And why was it once called Kampuchea?
Kampuchea was actually the name that the Khmer Rouge created to change the state's name into what they wanted it to be called. So before that, it was called Cambogie, but because it was a colony of France. And they said, no, we're not going to be named by some Westerners. We're going to take it back and give it our own name. So they named it Kampuchea. And then, of course, with the downfall, it was turned into Cambodia. Yeah.
Has your mother been back?
No, my mother hasn't been back yet because of civil unrest. So it's just in the last 10 years that finally people are starting to go back now. Yeah. So with the resurrection of the arts, we had a great support from the UN, 2008, where they created, how they have, St. George is part of the UNESCO site. They actually have a list now for intangible cultural heritages that need preserving, and the Khmer culture has been added to that list for UNESCO. So that's really giving us that push that we need. Yeah.
I wonder what you saying one of Pol Pot's men in government now.
Yes, yeah, right. right now, named Hun Sen. Yes. So as much as the Khmer Rouge Party is not in existence anymore, the people that were part of the former party are still in the government. So.
But how come that's the case? How come they're not being tried by international regulations?
The trial is happening right now. Yeah. But the UN trial is happening right now. They just convicted Nguyen Chinh Lang Suri 2-3 weeks ago. Life in imprisonment, but Pol Pot died in his sleep peacefully before he was even arrested.
Surrounded by his children.
Surrounded by his children and family. Yeah, and he gave all his money to his families to move to America. Yeah, so yeah.
His family are in America?
Yeah, in California. So,
How must they feel?
well, any other questions?
Dany,
Yeah.
religion,
Religion.
yeah. With the religion, like when you all came from Uva there and, you know, were taken to various other places, do you have any preference, like they have religious, anything like they keep going? Or
Oh yeah. What was really great about even the church taking in a lot of the refugees, there was no. Nobody was forcing any conversion. That was the great, I guess, big support from the church, is that we were going to help you preserve your culture. And so there are a few people that I know that have turned into Christians and Catholicism, but a lot of them are still also practicing their own tribal beliefs mixed in with these different religions that they've taken on. Like one of my aunts is. She considers herself a Catholic, that she goes to prayer at the temple all the time. So I go, okay, well, I guess you're allowed to do that. So, like even myself, growing up in the church, because my mother lived we were under sanctuary for the first 5 years of my life. I lived in the church, and I was raised by the nuns. But it was never forced upon us like you should be, doing this in the Christian way. Very, very much a supporting community of just survival.
I think it's amazing what you've done. You've taken us on a journey. You've educated us about the history. You've led us into, I think, some of that emotional space that a lot of people wouldn't even let their partners into. And you've done a lot more for me than I would have imagined you could have in 1 hour. I've watched some emotional responses happen around the room. First, I'm just going to keep it together until later. But I just thank you so much, Dany, for really being an amazing human being to allow us in like this to feel and know. To come back to your punctum, to feel and know something more than perhaps we would have done if you had had this talk with us.
Wait, I needed to explain the punctum too, because I needed people to have their own, just to introduce you to a new way of looking.
It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for ending with a happy note.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Ah, you go. Yes. No, I got this one. No, not that one.
So you can tell us more about
Oh, that's all right. They told them to make it next week.